Welcome to the Science Her Way podcast. I'm Kelly Pritchett.
I'm Anna Freire.
And I'm Robert Pritchett.
We are the co-hosts of the Science Her Way podcast. Welcome to a journey that celebrates innovation, empowerment, and science. We are thrilled to introduce you to Science Her Way, a podcast to explore the wonders of health and sports sciences. So fasten your seatbelts because we're embarking on a thrilling expedition through the world of health and sports sciences, driven by the relentless force of curiosity. Stay tuned for more engaging conversations, remarkable stories, and a celebration of Science Her Way. Welcome to another episode of Science Her Way. I'm Kelly Pritchett.
And I'm Robert Pritchett. And today we have one of our very own, Dr. Freire, who is an assistant professor at CW Health Science Department. She's a physical therapist with over 6 years of experience in rehabilitation interventions for pulmonary and cardiac conditions. Dr. Freire is originally from São Paulo, Brazil. She joined the CW team in 2022, contributing her clinical expertise in rehabilitation sciences. Dr. Freire, welcome, and we're excited to get to know a little bit more about you and your research.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
Thank you, Anna. I'm so excited to talk to you today. We want to give our listeners a good idea about your background. And so what sparked your passion for academia and research, especially the pulmonary rehabilitation field? And how did you end up on this scientific journey?
Yeah, so I'm a physical therapist, as Robert mentioned. In Brazil, we have a slightly different educational system. So we go straight from high school to the professional that you are applying to. So we go straight from high school to physical therapy school or med school or law school, depending on what are you aiming for. So we don't have that undergraduate stage of education. So I graduated from high school and then went straight to physical therapy school because that's what I wanted to do. And then during like the first year or first and second year of PT school, I was very lucky because I had a great mentor, Dr. Pacanelli, that introduced me to the world of research, and that's where everything started. So I had no idea what was research about, especially in the PT area, but she worked with cardiovascular patients, and she said, well, do you want to go to this conference? And I said, yeah, sure. I had no idea what do I need to do to go to the conference. I said, yeah, sure, let's do it. And I got to present some of the research that was being done, and that was it. Like, I love the academic world. I love learning about research and how research was done in a clinical setting. And that was it. For my first year in PT school, I knew that I wanted to go into like the academic world, do research, teach, and then I moved to do my master's at São Paulo State University. That's where I started to work towards like pulmonary rehabilitation field because the lab that I was participating was driven more about research questions regarding pulmonary conditions like COPD, smokers, the effect of pulmonary rehabilitation. So I did my master's degree more related to smoke cessation strategies, the effects of smoking in the respiratory system. And then I went and stayed at São Paulo State University to do my PhD in the same lab with Dr. Ramos. And that was where we studied the effects of exercise training, more specifically, and the effects on COPD patients. Then after that, during my PhD, I was awarded a scholarship to go to the University of Sydney to study with Dr. Elkin. So that was a fun stage of my life. Spent some time at the University of Sydney at the Physical Therapy Evidence Database, PEDRO database. And that was such an awesome experience. Finally, I came back, took a postdoc position as well at the Federal University of Minas Gerais for a year, then was teaching at Western of São Paulo University for a while in our PT program that I was once a student. And 2022, I decided that it was time for a change, new challenges. Central was kind enough to offer me a position. And so January 2022, in the middle of the worst winter ever, here I was. Moving from São Paulo, summer in Brazil, and then Ellensburg, winter, worst snowstorm ever, with just one suitcase, one husband, and 2 dogs. That was about it.
Only one husband? So that's a tremendous amount of experience that you've had. Are there any real key moments that change your trajectory as an academic?
Yeah, I think there are a few moments where I think ended up dictating our future, but I think a big one was my mentor, Dr. Pacanelli, said, you have to reach out to people. Things will not fall into your lap. Dreams will not fall into your lap. So if you want something, you're gonna have to pursue that. So I think when I decided that I wanted to do a master's degree and go into the academic path, I started like emailing a bunch of professors in a bunch of labs in different institutions. So I think that was a big one. And then when I was a little bit more mature, understanding how you have to sometimes make your luck. So take advantage of opportunities, even if they seem really, really unlikely, like the scholarship that I was mentioning that I was awarded to go to Australia was a really long shot because it was 6 scholarships to the whole country in any discipline. So it didn't have to be health science. It could be any type of research. Brazil has 200 million people, so it is a long shot, but you have to make your opportunities. I remember reading the email, and most of the people in my lab was like, oh, this is such a long shot. Like, I won't waste my time because it's impossible. And I say, you know what? If you will never know. If you don't apply, if you don't take those opportunities, you will never know. Someone has to win it. So I think those moments taught me a lot along the way.
Yeah, and you certainly live up to that today as a faculty member. I mean, you're always taking opportunities. You're always getting awarded something.
Yeah.
This podcast is thanks to you for putting our name in a hat and getting awarded the opportunity to host this podcast. So, I mean, you really have taken that to heart.
Well, the podcast was a team effort, but yeah, I really believe that if you want to see changes, if you want to see opportunities happening to you, you have to put yourself out there, and you will receive a lot of no's in a way. Few yeses, but there is a lot of no's as well.
You already have the no.
Yeah.
Find the yes.
Yeah, that's so true. I think, you really just highlighted the importance of networking and getting to know people in your field and not being afraid to reach out, not being afraid to apply for things. So I think, you got to take chances, and oftentimes there are more no's than there are yeses.
Well, both of you, Kelly and Anna, do this very, very well. I remember going to an ACSM conference with you, Kelly, when we were still doctoral students, and you were following, was it Nana Meyer?
I think it was Nancy Clark.
Oh, Nancy Clark. Nancy Clark, the guru of sports nutrition.
That's
around.
Right. Anyway.
Because you were trying to network with her.
And that's awesome because what I also discovered is like most people will be really approachable and they will be, not everyone, but most of them will. So you might be missing a lot if you are just afraid of not reaching out.
Yeah, definitely. So those are all, I feel like, important points for maybe future students, future, PhD master's students to consider when they're going out into the field. Can you walk us through a specific research project or study that really stands out for you?
Yeah, I think for today we picked to talk a little bit about chronic obstructive pulmonary disease and the effects of exercise on that population.
Okay, fantastic. Can you define COPD for those of us who need a deeper understanding?
Yeah, sure. So COPD is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and usually this will encompass 2 phenotypes of diseases. So chronic bronchitis is one phenotype of COPD, and emphysema is the other phenotype of COPD. So most patients with COPD will have maybe a mix or a predominance of bronchitis or maybe more emphysema. They have a little bit of physiological differences on the alterations in lung structure, but they will lead to similar symptoms. So most of those patients will have a lot of shortness of breath. We call that dyspnea because of alterations in their lung structure. They might feel a lot of shortness of breath during minimal activity, sometimes even at rest, depending on the severity of COPD. Cough, production of secretion, so a lot of mucus and sputum sometimes. And mostly COPD is caused by the exposure to noxious gases or particles like pollution, but 90, maybe a little bit more than 90% of cases are related to smoking and history of smoking. Okay. Any type of smoke, people, any type of smoke. Yeah, and we do have a smaller part of patients that might be related to genetic conditions. So we do have deficiency of alpha-1 antitrypsin that it's a genetic factor and could set up maybe in the early 40s, but it's more uncommon than the cases related to smoking and exposure to smoke or particles.
So can you tell us a little bit about this study where I believe you compared resistance training using traditional weight machines to bands for 12 weeks?
Yes. So during my PhD, we had at São Paulo State University a pulmonary rehabilitation program. So most people don't know that, but patients with pulmonary conditions need to go and be referred to a pulmonary rehabilitation program. And what is that? So pulmonary rehabilitation, it's a combined set of strategies that will include physical training, psychological support, pharmacological treatment, nutritional treatment. So it's a whole set of interventions to improve quality of life of those patients. And the cornerstone of pulmonary rehabilitation is physical activity, is exercise, is physical training, which seems really counterintuitive because if patients usually feel a lot of shortness of breath, especially at rest, you tell them that they have to exercise, they usually think that you are crazy because they have shortness of breath even for showering, brushing their teeth, doing like basic daily physical activity tasks. There is a whole education step of pulmonary rehabilitation that is encouraging patients to do exercise and show the benefits of exercising, which, as you can imagine, can be very challenging for patients with COPD. So although we know that physical activity and exercise is essential for patients with COPD, we still have a lot of challenges on, number one, having those patients included in pulmonary rehabilitation programs because we have a lack of pulmonary rehabilitation programs. So for those of you pursuing healthcare career paths, we do need more specialized healthcare providers that are able to manage that type of population. So what research shows is that only around 2 to 5% of patients with COPD are included in pulmonary rehabilitation programs. So it's kind of challenging because we do not have a lot of availability of programs, and especially in underdeveloped countries as Brazil, for example, we have much more challenges to get those patients in appropriate programs. So dealing with that problem is that pulmonary rehabilitation programs, they require a certain infrastructure, they require money, they require specialized professionals trained to deal and manage that type of condition. So it is a challenge. And on our research during my PhD, we were interested in maybe investigating resources that were more accessible in a financial perspective, but also in an infrastructure perspective. So that's why we were interested in analyzing the effects of elastic tools to physical training and to resistance training. So there is a lot of research regarding aerobic training for patients with COPD, and aerobic training is an awesome strategy. But sometimes, depending on the severity of COPD, patients cannot handle, for example, a treadmill training or a bike training in the first sessions, in the first weeks, especially if they are not engaged in any physical activity prior to being in a pulmonary rehabilitation program, which is often the case. So I think the literature is pretty sad on the effects and the benefits on aerobic training for those patients, but resistance training is still being study, and although we know that it's important as much as is for healthy individuals, we were still not sure around the effects of resistance training, especially with elastic components on these individuals. And that's what we did. We wanted to know if elastic components would promote the same level of muscle strength gains when compared to weight machine equipment.
So I have two pretty basic questions. What was your elastic component? How did you quantify the amount of resistance of these?
We used two types of elastic components. We did a randomized control trial, so patients were randomly allocated to one of three groups. So we had one group that was randomized to a weight machine equipment group. So the conventional weight machine equipment that you see in gyms and that are very common, but also very expensive and require a lot of space and infrastructure. Then we had patients for the second arm of the trial that was the elastic tubes. So they are round and made usually of rubber. And we had a third group that did elastic bands. So often named as TheraBand. We are not sponsored by TheraBand, but that's the brand that we used. So those were the three main groups.
So what was the main outcome of the study?
So we were able to show, so our primary outcome for the trial was to analyze if the gains in muscle strength were similar, right? And we saw that they were similar. So all the groups improved regarding muscle strength. So we performed dynamometry to assess muscle strength of patients before and after 12 weeks of training. So patients were training 3 times a week. The results showed that the gains were similar among all groups. We also evaluated secondary outcomes, so we analyzed body composition as well. We analyzed levels of physical daily activity through accelerometry data. Those secondary outcomes were not changed, so body composition did not change, which we attribute to a lack of nutritional support. So although the patients were doing exercise, they were included in an exercise protocol, they didn't have any instructions on the nutritional aspect, and that's something that definitely influenced not seeing those changes as we expected. And another interesting finding is that daily physical activity also did not change. And a lot of research has been done on this because it's still a challenge. So even when patients increase functional capacity, so they went and do like a 12-week program on exercise, they improve functional capacity, they improve aerobic capacity, unfortunately it does not translate into their daily physical activity. So they do not take more steps during the day, they do not change the amount of time that they spend on light or moderate activity during their day. So now that's the main challenge in COPD research. How do we get those patients to improve their daily physical activity as well and not just their exercise capacity?
Yeah, that's a tough one, I think, to try and get those individuals, that population, more physically active. Yeah, that's kind of the $1 million question, right?
Yeah, and I guess adherence once they leave the exercise program or, a cardiac rehab or pulmonary rehab program. I mean, do you know any patients that maybe carried on doing the resistance bands? I mean, that seems like something that's very practical to do at home. You could carry in your car and...
Yeah, so that was the goal, right? To make sure that, one, we were promoting similar gains as a weight machine equipment. And number two, that we were making those tools accessible, right? Because they could take it home. It's portable, it's accessible, it's cheap. Right. There are so many advantages, but we do not follow them up after the 12 weeks. But usually the reality that we see in pulmonary rehabilitation programs is that patients don't leave the pulmonary rehabilitation program. Right. So we have, and in our pulmonary rehabilitation program, that's very common, patients that were there for 10 years, 15 years, and they don't leave because probably I think they have that understanding that if they do, they will probably not continue exercising by themselves. I think that's also the social aspect. So you are usually pulmonary rehabilitation programs are led in groups, and you have colleagues that have the same struggles that you do. You share a diagnosis, you share the same difficulties in daily life. So I think that's a component. But there are a lot of research now investigating the effects of maybe telerehabilitation. So maybe after a supervised period of time, maybe 12 weeks, 16 weeks, patients could go home and maybe transition to a telerehabilitation program, maybe once supervised, like live sessions with a PT or a therapist, and then maybe twice a week that they are doing the exercise by themselves, but still keeping some level of supervision. Most research shows that it's hard for patients to adhere to that type of modality. Most patients like to go to rehab. They like to go to the program and stay there. But sometimes it's not an option because pulmonary rehabilitation programs might have a restriction on the number of patients that they can incorporate into their daily care. And so it's definitely a challenge.
Anna, based on your research and the studies, do you have sort of the one take-home point for COPD patients?
Yeah, I think the take-home is, one, if you are diagnosed with a pulmonary condition, with COPD, for example, it's extremely important that you seek for a healthcare provider to get advice regarding getting included in a pulmonary rehabilitation program. So that would be step number one. So COPD, we don't have a cure for COPD, but we do have a lot of effective strategies to manage that disease. So quality of life could be largely improved when patients are included in a pulmonary rehabilitation program. So that will intake not only pharmacological treatment, but also exercise, nutrition, psychological support. So we will be a multidisciplinary team working with you. It will be hard. It's hard, but changing that behavior, especially if you are still smoking. So smoking cessation, it's also a part of most of pulmonary rehabilitation programs. So step number one, smoke cessation. If you already stopped smoking, that's a great step. Now the next step would be to get engaged in exercise and all the other disciplines that we talked about. But it seems counterintuitive because, as I mentioned, a lot of patients might be struggling a lot with shortness of breath, even in the smallest daily activities like showering, eating, going to the restroom. So I know that it could be challenging and very counterintuitive that we are advising you to exercise, but we have a level A of evidence. That means that enough studies already show the improvements in quality of life for patients that go under an exercise training protocol. And we have so many different modalities of exercise that could be performed and lead to benefits. So we talked today about resistance training, but you could also do aerobic training. There are a lot of research now showing Tai Chi, Chuan strategies for COPD patients, yoga, Pilates. So we already have a very robust amount of evidence to support most of modalities of exercise for COPD patients. So it might be challenging, but in the long run, it will increase quality of life. You will be more independent in your daily tasks. And all those symptoms on shortness of breath, reduction of quality of life will improve. So I think that's the main take-home message. If you are struggling with COPD, if you have a family member that has COPD, it does not have a cure, but we do have a lot of strategies to manage and to improve symptoms in those patients.
Yeah, that's some great advice, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And I think when it comes to physical activity, it's just so important that our patients find something that they enjoy. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing. Like, if you don't enjoy swimming, then don't go do it, you know? So find something, whether it's pickleball or whatever it is. Figure out what brings you joy.
Yeah, definitely. And when we think about behavior change, we always say to patients that the magnitude of the change is less important than consistency. Mm-hmm. So it's better to make a small change that you will be able to keep up with it, then do a crazy, very restrict diet or a very crazy exercise protocol that you won't be able to keep, and you won't be able to keep it consistent in your daily life. But looking for that healthcare provider for advice, I think that's the main goal. And if you are looking into the internet, there is a lot of research that shows the information that is available on Google. It's not very reliable, so be very careful with the type of information that you are consuming. The best way to go is to go to a proper physician, healthcare provider, physical therapist that could properly advise you on the best course of management for you, because we also have different severities of COPD. So we also have to be careful and consider all the individualities of our patients.
Yeah, that's great. So I know the three of us work with a large student audience that are probably considering cardiac rehab or pulmonary rehab or this, field of study. Do you have any advice for those students that want to carry out this career path?
Yeah, well, I say do it because number one, the job market, it's really favorable if you want to do that because epidemiologically speaking, the prevalence is extremely high as well as cardiovascular diseases. So if you are getting yourself specialized and get some specific training on those conditions, the job market will be very favorable just epidemiologically speaking because people are getting more into e-cigarettes than ever and other sources of tobacco. So considering that perspective for future students, I think you would be in the very good position in a job market perspective, but also it's such an exciting field to work because you can see patients improving so fast. It's so rewarding to see patients that were not able to brush their hair by themselves without having a crisis of dyspnea. Wow. And in 2 or 3 weeks, they are already walking, going back to the grocery store, taking back their lives, being more independent. It's so rewarding to see that. It's so cool to see the effects of the best medicine of all, that's exercise. Yeah, and as I mentioned, the access for pulmonary patients to pulmonary rehabilitation programs, it's really low. So research shows that only 2 to 5% of patients get access to those programs. So we are in desperately need of pulmonary rehabilitation programs. And there's still a lot of research to be done. So even if you are going into the clinical route or if you're more interested in the research route, there's so much stuff that we still need to figure it out regarding COPD management. So I think that would be a great path for any student considering rehabilitation science or related field.
I share your sentiment on exercise is the best medicine.
Yeah.
It really is. It's cheap, it's effective, and from a quality of life perspective, just is completely significant, changing people's quality of life very quickly.
Yes. So I think that's one of the beauties of exercise and rehabilitation in the rehabilitation process.
Well, thank you, Anna, for sharing that with us. It was very enlightening. I suppose finishing up here, and to our listeners, we say buckle up for our exciting journey ahead. Science Her Way is here to spark curiosity, share knowledge, and make science relatable. And I think you did that 100% in sharing your research with us.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. Stay tuned for more captivating conversations where we discuss groundbreaking research and a few surprises along the way. This is just the beginning.
Thank you for having me, guys.